Hello, and welcome to WTF.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Our publishing schedule, or posting schedule.
Where we talk about books, writing, and all other sorts of things that we're interested in.
Today is about writing, and probably one of the most important parts of writing, which is pacing. So,
and it's also something that you can, it's very hard to nail down.
It's probably in general, I've been reading a lot more recently. I feel like a lot of the books I've been reading recently have had trouble nailing down pacing. And it's kind of frustrating as a reader. So let's talk about how to avoid that as a writer. If you're new to this channel, we're talking about writing. And if you're new to us, we should probably introduce ourselves. And my name is Aubin Elise. I am the author of The Second Nature of Indigo, which you can find below on Amazon. The link is in the description. And this is my lovely sister and partner in crime and everything.
Mariella May. I'm currently working on a fantasy duology that will be out very soon. If you watched our update video, which was yesterday, you will know more about that.
Yeah, go watch the announcement video because it has a lot of fun stuff in it.
But today we're going to be diving into pacing and particularly, I feel like, what can make it off. Or annoying.
Yeah. And then we'll talk about how to fix it afterward.
I feel like you need to know, because it's really hard to say, like, oh, this is how you should pace stuff. It's much easier just to say, like, these are some problems you can run into.
That's true.
So I don't think that we can, like, give you a proper skeleton to just, that's how you pace it. It's more like, here are some things that we have found really annoying and make a story much less engaging.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And if we have any tips, we'll give them at the end. So I'd say the first thing is cutting moments that have a lot of emotional depth off.
Yeah.
And usually you see this a lot in romance when things are starting to get a little hot and spicy or emotionally deep. And then the author is like, for tension's sake, we cut this off. And then, somebody usually interrupts them or somebody says something wrong. And then there's... Anyway, you can see it a lot. I'm sure you're thinking of examples right now.
Even with, I would say someone says something wrong isn't a bad thing.
No, that's true.
If someone says something wrong, that is, I wouldn't say a pacing problem. I would say that that's just annoying because it's annoying. But I'd say that's not something wrong. If, you're writing a romance or have a very strong romantic plot line and every time they're having an interaction, they get interrupted or like they have to leave or something else happens and they need to go deal with that, that is where it gets frustrating. Yeah. And I would say if you're like, oh, but I can't have more than this, I would say fuse one or like if you have two scenes that you need both of them and what happens in the middle could happen before or after them, I would say move it because it will be so much more satisfying even if we just get a little bit more. If it's like just a little bit more. And it could make the scene more powerful. You have like a very...
We were just talking about this with another book.
If you have a very like, physically romantic part and a very emotionally romantic part, then fusing those will make them both feel so much more powerful and strong.
Yeah, and you can also just add emotional depth to everything. But that's more talking about how to write romance, which we have a video of, and we'll link it right here.
Yep. Another thing I would say is, again, this obviously doesn't just apply to romance. So if you have, let's say, a fight scene, and you need this one character to get injured, and you need that other character to get injured, and so you just split them up into two different fights, but that character's still kind of injured in the second one, maybe you could just figure out a way to have them in the same fight, or have it just flow better, or maybe give a larger span of time between the two things. I feel like it can get really annoying with pacing if things are repetitive. If it's just like, okay, in a tiny battle, okay, in a tiny battle, or okay, a little piece of romance, okay, a little piece of romance. Because, like, it just gets all super samey. I feel this a lot in mysteries. When it's just like one clue leads to another clue, leads to another clue. And it's all just like this breadcrumb trail that has a very, like, specific through line and same spacing between them. Yeah. So mixing up like getting more information and getting no information can make it feel a lot more nuanced.
Another thing I would say with pacing is sometimes the setup seems too long and then the payoff is too short.
Or the payoff seems almost cut in half. It's like we start to get the payoff and then something shifts and we're building up to something else now. Let's say like a character in your story needed to get something from someone else, and so they like go through this whole long thing trying to get it from them, and they finally do, but then like someone else steals it from them instantly. So we just spent so long on them getting this thing, and then they instantly lose it, and we feel like we got half a payoff.
Yeah.
Like, especially, let's say it's a key to a door, and they need to like take this key back to that door, and so they're like going to get it back to the door, but then they lose the key again, and then it's just like we're back at square one. So we feel like it was all kind of again, that can be done well.
Yeah.
So
It can, absolutely. And I feel like there are ways in general, I would say, to fix any pacing problem without drastically changing your plot. It's just how you present the plot. Maybe your plot doesn't need to change significantly, but how you present it to the audience does. So there's this thing that Brandon Sanderson talks about in his YouTube video about plotting and pacing. Anyway, if I find it, I will link it. It's really great. And he's talking about giving the readers a sense of direction and progress.
Oh, yeah.
So if you don't feel like you're progressing in a story, the pacing is going to be all wrong because you don't feel like you're getting anywhere, and it often leads to boredom or senses of annoyance or anxiety, even depending on what it is.
Yeah, and it also can make your characters seem foolish or even dumb. Like, it's like you just need to do blah-de-da-de-da thing, and then, you know, the reader can see it, but the character can't yet. Especially if you have, like, either multiple POVs or a third person. So, like, the reader can hear and see more than what's the main character can. So it's just like, oh, you're so close, and you just need to figure out this one thing. And if that drags on for a period of time, that's usually when I put down a book. If I'm just like, okay.
It used to be that I was so impatient as a young reader for the two POVs to meet up. I would not enjoy either POV until they met up for some reason. Even if there was no romance involved, it was just like, I need them all to meet up. I'm not like that anymore, which is good.
Yeah. Another thing I would say with pacing and multiple POVs is evenly spreading out your POVs. Because if you have one character that you just... I'm not saying like you need to have like an even rotation where it's like this character, that character, this character, that character.
Because they're not all doing the same amount within the plot.
So
and they're not all as interesting as each other sometimes.
An interesting thing was, I'm pretty sure in the Percy Jackson Hero of Olympus series, at first it was all evenly cycling through each of the characters. But when, you know, two of the characters got separated from the rest of the characters, it would go one of the characters in the other party, one of the characters in that party, one of the characters in that party, even though there were more characters in that group. So that's really interesting. If you have like two storylines that have equal importance, but one of them has more characters, that can be a really fun way to dish out that. Yeah. So
another example is Caraval in the last book finale. Like, one of the storylines is not as
vital,
but, well, I would say it's vital. It's just not as active as the other one, so it's referred to a lot less than the other one, but you need both of them to make the story. If you're ever wondering if you should keep your POVs, if you have too many or something and it's throwing off your pacing, which it could be, sometimes having too many POVs does,
or too few if you have
too few.
If there's one character that's really important but we like never get anything from them.
Writing advice I've heard is just to make sure that they are essential to telling the story you want to tell. So...
yeah, you're not just writing them for the sake of writing them.
Yes, you don't have to feel obligated to write any of your POVs, so even only write them if you really, really want them.
I would say even if it's like a second book and you're like, okay, this character's just not as important anymore. Like, don't feel bad if you either give them less time or no time at all. If they'd like... again, don't serve the purpose of your story. They're not necessary.
Mm-hmm. And if you get to that point and the whole character is feeling out of place within the story, then, I mean, it's up to you, of course, but you can always write them away or something. A crazy example is Butterfly Girl in Renegades. She gets like no screen time. Anyway, if you can always
some characters have less
write
importance.
people out.
And
that will give you more time to focus on other characters. And one thing I would say with pacing is that something that helps is giving certain information from the POV that it's most impactful from.
Yes.
Especially when you have... you see this a lot in romance. It's like some moments are more impactful from X character rather than Y character. And it's always more fun to get it from their perspective.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And, of course, you can flip this on its head if you want to, like, mess around with it. But
I would say also a fun thing with pacing, I feel like a lot of people don't like backtracking, but if you have multiple POVs, that's actually a really cool time. If you have, like, a romance scene and it's super impactful for both characters, you can backtrack and you can have it run again from the other character's perspective.
And, personally, I would love that. I don't see that happen a lot, but I would really enjoy that.
There's so many times where I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this character thinking? What is this character feeling? What's going on here? Mm-hmm. So it would be so exciting. You finish the chapter, you finish what's going on, and then it goes back and you're like, oh, yes.
We get to live it again.
So
it depends on what you need for your story.
Again, it's all about, we're just giving you advice.
Yeah.
So it's all what you feel like putting into your story to make it the most yours. It is.
Mm-hmm. And when you have this fun POV, you're not really thinking about how long it's taking. You don't want your readers to think about how long stuff is taking. You want them to enjoy wherever they are in the story. Mm-hmm. Unless, of course, you're trying to create a mood that's
kind of slow.
Opposite from that. What would be a good example? Hunger Games? I feel like with the Hunger Games, we were all kind of like tensed up for the games to start, but everything leading up to that was really, really important. But it was Hunger also Games itself created this sense of urgency.
But also the sense of like dramatic slowness.
Yes.
Which made it so much more like, okay.
And then the games start and you're like, now we're in it and we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So
just giving yourself the space and time to play with things. I would say the most important thing is how I write at the speed I'm interested in. So I will move on to things if I'm no longer interested in what I'm writing. Okay, this is causing a little bit of annoyance in editing, but that's what editing's for.
It is.
So
it is.
I would say it's almost easier. It's easier for your heart to add stuff than to take out stuff. Because if you have to take out a scene, you spent like 3 days writing, that's going to hurt a little. I mean, you will probably still have to do that a lot. But I think especially if you just prioritize the scenes that you really care about, it'll be way easier when you're editing, because it'll also be, you'll edit stuff that you care about instead of editing scenes that you don't care about as much.
Yes. And as an editor, I would say it's actually easier to edit stuff that's on the page.
Yeah,
but
I'd say it's
as a writer, it was easier for me to add stuff in. But also, I think if you are writing and it's going super well, I'd say think about pacing, but you don't have to make it perfect on the first run. My book was absolutely insane with pacing. It was terrible, but it's okay. I spent 1.5 years editing it.
Yeah,
and
I would say
it got a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. First draft, just get it on the page. I feel like, especially like younger writers or starting out writers get really worried about their first draft, or like, because it's a lot of words. Like my first draft was 8,000. 80.
Oh, okay.
80,000 words. So that's a lot of words, especially seeing as how I was writing like 2,000 words a day. So that was still like 40 days of fully working on it.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I didn't get to 2,000 until like halfway through. So I was writing like 1,000 words a day. Anyway, I feel like you can easily get overwhelmed if you're also trying to worry about pacing, and you're also trying to worry about balancing these and this and blah-de-da-de-da. So if you write your first draft and then you go back and you're like, actually, this scene would be way more interesting from that character's perspective. That's a really fun thing that you can do because, first of all, you already know what's going on in the story. You know where it's going, and you know who that character is.
Yes, and I think it's hard to pace a story when you don't know the characters because you don't know how much time to give to each aspect of them because there's the plot, yes, but then there's also the character and how they're developing and what aspects of them are most important. So, for instance, my character in the book I'm writing right now believes himself to be insane. So I need to balance his insanity with the normal life aspects of him. If the insanity is too overwhelming, it will make the pacing feel really, really, really slow because he's in his head all the time. But at the same time, I do want to convey that he is a very intellectual person. So the balance for him is very different from my main character in the Indigo series, Indigo Book 1. Her name is Indigo. And she doesn't think like Gabriel's, so her pacing is entirely different. Sometimes you have to get to the end of the book and know who the character is to know how you have to pace it. I could not have paced this book 2 years ago because I had no idea who the character was. So,
yeah, for my book, I, wrote the first draft, finished it, and rewrote the whole end. I'm currently rewriting the end again, less extreme this time. But first draft, I didn't know how the character ended up. I didn't know her full arc.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I finished it, and then I gave myself some space, and I was like, because my book's a duology, I figured out what was going to happen in book 2. I mean, I started writing book 2, and I was like, this is not the story. This is not my story. This is not what I really want to write. So it became a lot sadder.
Yeah.
And it became a lot more honest and a lot more impactful, for me at least. And I mean, again, writing at the speed I enjoy, so I'm also writing what I enjoy. I think that's another beautiful thing about writing. You're writing your story, and other people will connect with your story. And if you're just trying to write what's popular
or best, I feel like sometimes we chase what's best, and that makes us trip and fall getting to the story that we actually love.
Another thing I'm going to say is don't be afraid to use tropes. I feel like everyone is so like, oh my gosh, these tropes are so bad. Orphan trope, blah-de-da. I mean, there are some that everyone loves, and it's like, oh my gosh, found family. Oh my gosh, Grumpy X Sunshine. But then there are also ones where it's like, never use these. These are terrible tropes. We are all...
Depends on who you ask, I would say.
Exactly. So if it's a trope that you enjoy, don't feel bad about writing it. Like, you're going to find someone who hates every trope, and you're also going to find someone who loves every trope.
Yeah.
I mean, tropes exist because somebody loved it and wrote it, and then someone else loved it and wrote it, and slowly it became a thing.
Before there were tropes, there were just stories, and enough stories went down the same path that it became a marked road.
Yeah.
And then people put up signs, and were like, don't follow those signs.
This road closed. Don't write this way.
One thing I would say is something that's annoying me a lot right now as I'm reading is that there isn't enough time, in my opinion, taken for the emotional journey of characters. And you might find this with your story. I think I did. In writing Indigo for the first time, it was very, very plot heavy. And then going through, I was able to expand some moments, let them breathe, really introduce some things that the character would have done realistically, and then had to process them. Sometimes you do have to slow down. And another time you have to slow down, usually, is suspense. Because let me tell you, you probably think you're writing a lot more suspense than you actually are. In first drafts, both of us were terrible at writing suspense. We'd be like, oh yeah, this. And then you read it, you're like, is this too much? And then you read it, and...
There was this scene. Aubin, we were editing together, and Aubin was like, whoa, you need to fill out this scene way more. I have no idea what's going on here. And I was like, I can do. So I start writing. Yeah. I've been writing for 30 minutes, and I'm like, okay, this scene's getting kind of long. It was 400 words.
Yeah,
it was not nearly long enough. Because I was so unused to writing that scene, that particular type of scene. So I was like... how do I make this more impactful?
And it's not just about words. It's not, suspense is not just about the length of time. And I feel like sometimes in horror movies, I have in watching a horror movie, I'm sometimes just like, this is going on for so long that I've lost interest in the suspense. So it's not just about length, and in books, it's not just about word count. So there are aspects of your story that you can introduce or heighten that make the reader feel like more or less time has passed without dramatically just slapping more words on the page.
Yeah.
Because if you just slap a bunch of words on the page, the reader's eyes are just going to glaze over, and then they're going to drift off the page, and then they realize they have to eat, and then you're gone.
Yeah, and then when they come back, their suspense is gone.
Yes,
because
they
left in the middle of it.
Then it's completely ruined.
So I would say it's a very careful balance, and it's more about the language you use than the number of words, like Aubin said. It's about how you're conveying the suspense, and I would say also suspense is a great time to get personal perspective. So giving what the character is feeling and what they are thinking and how this impacts them and their previous things. I would say also connecting to things that the reader has already read will make them more engaged.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever I read something that, happened like way back in the book, it was like 8 chapters ago and it was a small mention, but then it's connected now and I'm like, oh, yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
It feels so cool and is so engaging because you're like, oh, well, now I want to see how that plays out. So just finding those little details and bringing them back if you want to or need to, like rereading your story and being like, oh, yes, that loose end that I never dealt with.
The other thing I would say is as I'm reading Ella's book or I'm editing mine, what happens often is that I'm like, I don't feel super grounded in this scene, so the suspense isn't really working, aka the pacing isn't really working. So what you can do is ground them in their bodies. You can make the reader and your character feel something. Like when you feel suspense or when you feel elation or when you feel longing
or tiredness,
then there are certain things in your body and how you see the world around you that you can put on the page and gets this pacing across. And so, especially with fight scenes, I'd say, and fight scenes are Ella
really
and
difficult.
Myself. Fight scenes are usually a little bit on the shorter side. So,
and I don't think that's bad. Okay,
I would say with the body active thing, I would say is good.
I would say another thing with pacing and fight scenes in particular, you can go overboard and it gets boring again.
Yes.
Eyes slipping off the page. If you're describing thrusts and parries for 2 minutes and nothing really happens, it's gonna get a little boring. So I would say splice it with how the character's feeling. Are they getting tired? Are they getting worn out? Did they get hurt? Are they bleeding? How is this making them feel? Are they defending someone else? Are they watching to see if someone can get to safety now?
There's usually another danger outside of just their life and this imminent danger that
they're also worrying
about. So you can bring that in. If they're fighting to get to a doorway or something, then
it's how are they getting there? How close are they? Are they being beaten back? Are they getting farther?
Because that illustrates progress, which is a huge part of pacing.
Yeah, and it makes you feel like something's actually happening,
and you're gaining or losing something, which makes you more invested.
So I would say definitely gains and losses.
Yeah.
If there is just a huge chunk in your story where nothing is gained or lost, it's going to be boring.
And it doesn't have to be physical. It can be emotional. It doesn't have to
it doesn't have to be huge, as long as it's impactful. It could be small things that they lose or gain.
Yeah.
As long as it matters to them, it will start to matter to the reader.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well.
We probably have more thoughts on pacing.
We do.
But we could always do a part 2.
We could. Well, if we have another video, we'll definitely link back to this one. So if you came from our other video, hello! Should we talk about flashbacks for a sec? No, that'll be in part 2.
Flashbacks will be in part 2. All right, sounds good.
So, well, guys, thank you so much for being here.
Yes.
I wish you well in your writing journey.
Yeah.
I hope it goes super well.
Writing, editing,
whatever you're working on.
Whatever you're doing. If you want to take a break and read or do something, we have videos about reading as well. If you need to focus, we have a video that's focused with us.
Yeah.
And join the Discord.
yeah, we have a Discord, so in there you can also talk about writing. We'll talk with you. We're pretty active on it, so if you want to hang out with us more, want to get more advice, want to, you know, build into our community, it would be really awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, and
Bye.